So I always say Thanksgiving isn't a Jewish holiday, but gratitude is extremely Jewish and has roots in our tradition and in our liturgy. And any holiday that promotes the opportunity to be with people that you love and to thank God and each other for the blessings in our lives, that is a Jewish holiday. And so hopefully whatever you did for the holiday, it brought you an opportunity for gratitude. It brought you an opportunity to notice the blessings in your lives in a way that maybe is different than the rest of the year. We do say thank you to God every single day, and yet sometimes it takes that extra little push of being particularly mindful and intentional about gratitude to help us recognize all of the things in our lives. So I am really excited to get to teach today. It's almost harder when you have a blank slate and they say you can teach about whatever you want, because it's easier if somebody says, I want you to teach about X, Y, or Z. And yet I love the opportunity to pick for myself. So but I kind of debated for a while, and then I came back to the thing that I love to teach about more than anything and figured that it would be a good opportunity to share it with you. I love teaching about rituals. Rituals, it is the thing that I wrote my thesis about in rabbinical school. It is something that I think is magic in so many senses of the word, not the hokey magic, but really what makes Judaism meaningful is this combination of intention and words, but also action associated with it that really helps to transform an ordinary experience and a mundane experience into something that is holy. And what I mean by holy is that word kadosh, right? Kadosh means holiness in Judaism, kedusha. And kedusha, I always say under the chuppah to people at a wedding, when we say that, we actually use that word in our wedding vows. We say, Harei at mikudeshet li, you are made holy to me. And what does it mean to make somebody holy to you? It means that you set them apart as separate to you. Holiness has a connotation of being separate or different from something else. And that is the sense that we bring into every ritual that we engage in. We try to create a level of holiness, a level of separation and distinction, so that it is set apart from every other ordinary moment in our lives. And that, I think, is what makes ritual so deeply meaningful and so magical in a way, because we get the opportunity to create these moments where we create holiness in our lives. And yet, they don't come out of nowhere, right? We don't just make up ritual on the spot and call it holy. That is what tends to make people say, oh, that's a little bit, woo-woo and hokey. That's not what we're talking about. Authentic Jewish ritual can be innovated. It can be something that we create, but it has to have its roots in tradition, and it has to be something that comes from our sources. We have what I like to call, and what one of my favorite writers, Vanessa Oakes, likes to call our toolbox of ritual opportunities. And we can take those opportunities and make ritual that's meaningful, but we have to come from our toolkit. I think there's somebody, okay, it's open. So I want to do a little bit of study with you because I want to show us the ways that ritual actually comes from our sources and our texts, and therefore finds its way from the texts that we say are sacred and holy and into our lives in a way that we can make them actionable and have an opportunity to put action with words and make ritual and make it magical and meaningful. So one of the first things I always look at with people is the Shabbat candles, because it's something that is so prolific in our tradition. We do the Shabbat candles, we light them every week at sundown on Shabbat. We light them on festivals, but we're specifically going to talk about Shabbat candles. So who here lights the Shabbat candles with even a moderate level of frequency? Yeah, most of us here in this room either have or participate regularly or semi-regularly, or even, more than once in our lives, right? Where does that come from? Did somebody just make it up? And the answer is no, it's not just made up. It's from our texts. Our rabbis looked to our text and found ways that we needed to create holiness through candles. So I want to go through some of the candles and talk about the differences and where they come from and what they therefore mean in our lives. Does anybody here have a ritual or something that is meaningful to their family that they do around lighting candles? Anetta?
We still use the little prayer book from the ELC, which used to be the CDC from when Bill was 2 years old.
Oh.
Every single week, and he's 20.
So amazing. So for those of us who are on the video and who might not be sitting next to Anetta, she said that they still use the same little prayer book that the ELC, formerly known as the CDC, created. Sounds like 18 years ago, because Mendel got it when he was 2 and he just turned 20. So using that same little prayer book from your children for the last 18 years, every single week to light candles. Beautiful. Anything else? Mm-hmm.
I use my grandmother's that I got when I got married,
Nice.
and they'll go to my granddaughter.
So you use your grandmother's from when you got married, and you're going to one day pass them down to your granddaughter. What a beautiful tradition. We use the same ritual items that bring more meaning into it, because you know that it came from the generation before you, and you know that one day, many, 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 many moons from now, you will pass them on to your granddaughter. Beautiful. Anybody else? How many candles do you guys light? How many candles do you light when you light Shabbat candles? So I hold it up. I see 3, I see 5, I see 2, I see 10 over there. 2, 2, 2. There's lots of different traditions. So for example, this is the microphone. From when I grew up, I always grew up lighting as many candles as you had family members in your house. That was my grandmother and my great-grandmother's tradition. So we would all gather around the candles. And because we were there with multiple generations, I grew up lighting like enough to probably set off a smoke detector in our house, because my grandmother had to light her number and my mom had to light her number and my great-grandmother had to light for everybody. And but it was our tradition. And then I found out that actually the number in Judaism, because we all create meaning from that, is actually 2. And I learned why. And it comes from the Talmud, that we have to light at least 2 candles. So let's look at the first text that I brought. The Talmud talks to us about lighting 2 candles. Now we extrapolate from that because we create our own meaning from it. But the Jewish tradition says light 2. So the text says, and I'm going to read just so everybody can hear, but you can follow along. It's the top. As it is taught, remember, which is in Exodus. Remember, it says Zachor et HaShabbat. Remember in Exodus 20, verse 8, and guard, Shamor et HaShabbat, which is in Deuteronomy, were pronounced in a single utterance, which the mouth cannot utter, which the ear cannot hear. It is reasonable there to say that they were pronounced as one utterance, as Rav Ada bar Ahava said. For Rav Ada bar Ahava said, women are obligated in sanctifying the Shabbat day from the Torah, as the Torah states, remember and guard. All who are included in guarding are included in remembering, and those women, because they are included in guarding, they are also included in remembering. So let's unpack that for a minute. How is it that 2 commandments were uttered in a single sentence? So does everybody know the prayer Lecha Dodi? So in the first verse of Lecha Dodi, it says, Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad. Remember, or guard, Shamor v'zachor, remember, b'dibur, in one word, echad, b'dibur echad. It is said that God, because we ascribe to God human-like characteristics, but God is beyond human-like characteristics. So it is said that God uttered both of these commandments in one single word, but we as human beings had to break those up into 2 words, to remember and to guard. But in fact, they're not different, they're the same. So we have 2 candles, therefore, to represent the 2 different commandments, Shamor v'Zachor, but we know that they weren't actually different, they mean the same, and all who are obligated, women and men, are required to do both, because they both came in the single word. So that is how we end up with the tradition of having 2 candles, though we always, as I said, I grew up lighting 1,000,004. Annetta lights 10 every week. Because what comes from our texts, and this I think is the beautiful thing about Judaism, the rituals, we are grounded in them, right? And we put our own meaning and our own feelings and our own ways of doing things into the texts and therefore into our lives. It doesn't just remain on the page. We have to bring our own senses of selves and families and values into them, and that's what makes Judaism continue to be alive. So we have 2 candles. So let's read the next text, because all of these things, like I said, we're going to work into life cycle rituals in a minute, but let's just keep going with Shabbat candles for a second. So now we know Shamor v'Zachor, 2 commandments, one utterance means 2 candles. The second text, well, does anybody want to read? I can walk around. Somebody else can read. Don't all volunteer at once. Susie, I know I'm known.
You're a good reader.
I'm a good reader. Sherry's a good reader too.
Rav Yosef's wife used to kindle the Sabbath lights late. Thereupon Rav Yosef said to her, it was taught, he took not away the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. This teaches that the pillar of cloud overlapped the pillar of fire, and the pillar of fire overlapped the pillar of cloud. Thereupon she thought of doing it very late. Said an old man to her, it was taught, providing that one is not too early or too late.
Thank you. Okay, so what does that mean? Some of our texts are not so very clear, right? Do we light candles whenever we want to? No. We're pretty specific in Judaism. If there's something that we're pretty machmir, really like specific about details, right? We have a lot of big questions that remain unanswered, right? We have a lot of big questions like, what does it actually mean to work, right? We don't know. But then there are 39 different categories with every different subcategory until there's minute rules that tell us exactly what we need to know or do. And yet there are still more questions than answers, because that in a nutshell is what it means to be Jewish. So we know Rav Joseph's wife used to kindle the Shabbat lights late. But then it goes back to the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. This teaches that the pillar of cloud overlapped the pillar of fire a brief amount of time. You can't do it very early. You also can't do it very late. There is a specific time by which we are supposed to kindle the lights. Who here knows exactly what time we are supposed to kindle the lights on Shabbat? Sherry has a magnet that says, right? I could tell you from here for the next 50 years probably, depending on what time zone you live in, exactly when you're supposed to light the Shabbat candles. What?
Wasn't it when the sun goes down?
It is when the sun goes down, correct. But that happens at different times depending on the cycle of the sun and where you are in the country and what time, where you are in the world actually. So we do have to, so now we know that there are 2 different commandments. We know that we're supposed to light at least 2 candles, and we know that we're supposed to do it at a relatively specific time. Now, yes?
Oh, I wondered, my son lives in Israel, and he said there's a period of time, I don't know how many minutes it is, like 18 or something, where you can do it after.
Yes.
So, but why is that?
So, we're going to give you a grace period is what it amounts to. So we have a time that we're supposed to light the candles, but we also, like the rabbis understood that, you may get a little distracted. Maybe your kid is throwing a tantrum and you need to take a moment and calm them down before you light the Shabbat candles, which should theoretically be a pretty centering and peaceful experience. There is a grace period by which you should light the candles. It's usually about 18 minutes so that you can have enough time to make sure it happens. In Judaism, we have this notion of building a fence around Torah, meaning that we create the guidelines and know that there's a little bit of wiggle room so that we make sure that we're following the commandments appropriately. So we know that there's a specific time. We know that there's 2 candles. And we know that this is something that is, if we're looking at gendered ways of doing commandments, there are women's commandments and there are men's commandments, that this is traditionally a woman's commandment. There are 3 commandments that women are responsible for. One is lighting Shabbat candles, the other is separating challah dough, and the third are the commandments surrounding family purity laws. We're not going to go into those. But Shabbat candles is one of the responsibilities that women are supposed to do on behalf of their families. So we know that there are some rules around them. Naomi, what time are we over? 1 o'clock. Okay, thank you. I just want to keep my eye around the time. We're going to skip the last one. I'm just going to go over it really quickly. Basically, this talks about this line from Genesis about comforting, that Isaac took his new bride and that helped into his tent and that comforted him after the loss of his mother. And there are different things that she did, including keeping a candle alive on Shabbat that helped his grief and helped comfort him. All of this is to show that ritual can become in our lives something that leaps off the page and becomes meaningful in a way that we may not expect. So I'm going to ask you to think for just a moment. Think about a time when Shabbat candles has become meaningful to you. And I'm going to ask you to turn to somebody next to you and briefly share, just in one sentence, why Shabbat candles has or could be meaningful in your life. To bring back the conversation after I let you go off into it, but we're going to try really hard. So I'm going to invite you to come back to the group, and I'm going to take 2 people. So how has Shabbat candles and the lighting of Shabbat candles been meaningful in your life? Yes.
It starts the beginning of Shabbos. So for me, it starts the beginning of the time when I don't watch TV, I don't listen to the radio, I don't use my phone.
So it becomes, for you, it becomes a transitional marker, right? It represents the time that you are about to start doing something different from the rest of the week. Beautiful. Thank you. Jennifer.
I observe Shabbat, by going to different schools, but I'm trying to navigate my way of how to do it, but for me, Shabbat recalibrates me,
Mm-hmm.
and especially now,
Yeah.
like it really keeps me. So I'm honored to participate. It just recalibrates.
So it recalibrates for you. It, again, similarly, it's a marker for you that helps you know that it's about to start this thing that you're helping to recalibrate your life. Beautiful. So I don't think you were paid actors in this, but you guys just gave me the perfect segue into our next part of the text. So ritual in life cycle sense, which is my personal passion, as much as I love a Shabbat candle, life cycle ritual is where my research and my learning is centered. So life cycle ritual, Victor Turner, who is a scholar and a theorist around ritual, you know who I'm talking about. Okay, I see the head nod over there. He says that that ritual marks what's called a liminal space. A liminal space is something that he describes as the space betwixt and between something else. So I always describe liminal space as a doorway. So if you look at the threshold of a doorway right over here, if you're out in the hall, you're standing on one side of the door, you are out in the hall very firmly. Once you cross the threshold, you are in this room, right? If you are in the doorway, like pretend the doors weren't there and the door was open, if you stood exactly in the doorway, you are in a liminal space. You are neither in the hallway nor are you in this room. You are between both of them. And if you look at life cycle events, think about them carefully. Every life cycle event marks that liminal space. For a brit milah, for a baby, They are just born. They have not yet entered into the covenant of Judaism. They do not have a Hebrew name. They are in that in-between space. They go from an unnamed baby who's not part of the Jewish community. In that moment of ritual, they become named, they become part of the community. For a bar or bat mitzvah, a child is not an adult in the Jewish community. They're kind of in this awkward preteen years, which I don't think was the rabbi's intention, but that is where we're at. They become, in the moment of b'nai mitzvah, an adult. There's something transformative that happens where some level of moment of transformation happens in the ritual, and they become an adult. If you think about a wedding, there's that space where they become something else. You go from first you're engaged, and then you're married. Something happens under that chuppah that brings you from an unmarried state into a married state. That space is called liminal space. And what makes Jewish ritual important is that it provides not only a marker for it, but it brings something divine and sacred and holy into that moment. Because there are so many things that we could just let pass us by, right? If you don't mark them, they become unimportant. They become they're not holy. The second you create ritual around something, you give it the opportunity for a transformative, holy process. And that creates meaning in people's lives. And that is what Judaism does. And it gives us the gift of being able to do, is create meaning and holiness. And that's something that we really can't, I can't really under or overstate the importance of, really. Because when you have an opportunity to mark something in a Jewish way, you give people the opportunity to bring something holy, you bring community, you bring meaning into it instead of just saying, okay, I've brought a baby home. I'm now in the throes of diaper changes and, bottles and all sorts of other things. But then, if we say, no, we're going to come together as a community, we're going to create a ritual around this, it gives us something to hold on to and to create meaning around in a beautiful and really deeply profound way. And yet these rituals, like I said, they come from our toolbox. Like, nobody just made it up on the spot. When I look to create ritual or to think about ritual or to innovate ritual, doesn't matter, we always look at what the texts say, no matter what movement of Judaism that you're a part of. They come from something and from somewhere. And that's what I want to look at together today. Where do these rituals come from? I imagine all of these rituals are pretty familiar to you all. How many of you have read all the texts? And this isn't even all-encompassing. These are a sprinkling of texts that come from. Has anybody read all of the texts where we get b'nai mitzvah, where we get wedding, all of these things? That's what we're going to dive into here. And if it is a repeat from some of you, pretend it's new. So Brit Milah is the traditional baby naming. By the way, most of our texts, spoiler alert, come from a very patriarchal, male-centered perspective. Baby naming for girls, not in our traditional texts. But it is something that we pull from. We look at our traditional texts and we pull from that in order to help create meaning for egalitarian ways of doing rituals. So this says Brit Milah, but we extrapolate from that and we find ways to create meaning and ritual for baby girls as well. It's equally as important. So from Genesis, let's look. You know what? Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Sherry. You're right. I probably am just going to read instead of walking around. But if somebody feels a deep desire to read, you're welcome to come up here and take the mic. So for Brit Milah, this is my covenant, God's covenant, which you shall keep between me and your seed after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of a covenant between me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every male throughout your generations, he that is born in your house, or bought with money of any foreigner that is not of your seed. He that is born in your house and he that is bought with your money must needs be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. So this, of all of them, is probably one you're most familiar with. Why do we circumcise babies on the 8th day? Because it tells us in black and white that that is the sign of the covenant in the book of Genesis, chapter 17. Yes, Joan?
I have a question about circumcision.
Yes.
It seems like an odd ritual.
Does seem like a little bit of an odd ritual, yes.
And I guess, as I'm thinking about it, I'm curious, was this the first instance of this practice appearing in humanity? I mean, this in the Jewish context? Or was circumcision a thing in any other cultures prior to that?
So Joan asked whether circumcision was common in other cultures or did Judaism invent it, essentially.
That's much more concise, yes, thank you.
I just, you gave me the information. I just, tightened it up. So the bottom line is, I don't know for sure. Okay, so I want to preface it with this. I don't know the actual answer. I'm not versed in ancient history in that way. However, what I do know is that Judaism and Torah did not get developed in a vacuum. And there are a lot of times that we see what is in Torah mirrored in society, but put into a way that the Jewish community, that the Israelite community is going to find meaning in it in their own faith tradition. So I would imagine that they did not make up circumcision. I would imagine that it was something that was in the culture around them and that they adopted and formalized into the Israelite tradition that became a Jewish tradition. There are a lot of people who might refute that. There are a lot of people who would probably support that. But in general, there are some times that we see practices being part of the world around us, but we make them wholly indifferent in Judaism. So was it on the 8th day in other cultures? I have no idea. Probably not, right? There was probably some element of our tradition that became concretized and canonized in Judaism that was similar, yet a little bit different than the world around them. That's my best guess on it. So,
didn't circumcision start with Abraham?
It is, yes.
Circumcised his son and then circumcised himself.
Well, first he circumcised himself, yes. In Genesis 17, he circumcised himself, and then therefore everybody else in his household. Yes, so it started, this is early on in Genesis, started with Abraham. We see it throughout. We see a very, an emergency circumcision happening with Moses in Exodus with his son. There's lots of instances throughout the Torah of circumcision. And what we do know in the context of ritual is that it is done on the 8th day. Now, in our modern world, we still do this. And I'm not going to get into the debates on whether we can or should or what the medical community says or doesn't say about it, because that's actually not my expertise. What I will say is that in every ritual, in every time-bound anything, there are caveats for health-related things. So there are babies who are born who it is not safe to circumcise on the 8th day. And to anybody, any rabbi ever would always tell you, you prioritize pikuach nefesh, the health of the baby, above the commandment of the 8th day. When it is safe and when the doctor gives the go-ahead for circumcision, that's when you do it, right? You do it when it is safe. For example, it's not always about health. Sometimes it's about holidays, because some holidays you do circumcise on and some days you do not. So Shabbat, you actually are supposed to circumcise. The commandment to circumcise actually overrides the prohibition to do that on Shabbat. So if your baby is born and needs a circumcision on the day of Shabbat, you circumcise on the day of Shabbat. There's provisions for lots of different things, whether your child was born in C-section or not. There's different kinds of ways that we do it, but all of it comes back to this text. And then we create ritual and meaning. So for those of you who have been to a Brit Milah, you know that there's a whole standardized ritual and procedure that we've created where we have Elijah's chair, right? We have Kisei HaEliyahu. We have Kisei Eliyahu. Elijah the prophet comes to every Brit Milah. That does not say that here. It's not in Genesis. We create meaning and ways of doing things that provide memory and intention for our families that stem in the text, but that we extrapolate beyond. Okay? Questions? Yes, that's not a question. Okay.
But it's not about this. When I was growing up, my mother lost her father when she was 5. And so they never did Havdalah. My question is about Havdalah, because you didn't mention it, and it is a ritual, I think, but it never was in my family because her father was God. So I guess my question is, I know that if women don't light Shabbos candles, that men are supposed to do it. What happens with Havdalah?
So, like you said, if the question was what Havdalah, and with Shabbat candles, if a woman can't do it, or they're not married, or there is no woman to do it, a man is supposed to do it. Is that true of Havdalah? Is that what you're asking?
I guess so, because growing up, my father never did it. I guess because my mother's father never did it. I don't know. And so I was not used to doing it because we never did it. I always saw my mother light Shabbat candles, but we never had Havdalah. So I guess that was my question. Since you didn't mention it on this paper, and it didn't happen until I learned about it, could you tell a little about it and why, did it happen when they lit candles? Was that a later thing?
So I didn't bring that text here. You're correct. I wish that I could bring every ritual. We only have an hour. It's a little limiting.
Sorry,
No, it's okay. The answer is Havdalah, in the same way, doesn't have as clear of a text. There are lots of textual Talmudic traditions and texts that say that you look for 3 stars in the sky, and then you perform, Havdalah. And it isn't gendered, actually, in the same way. It is not a woman's or a man's commandment. Anybody is able to do Havdalah because it marks the end of Shabbat the way that Shabbat candles mark the beginning.
That's why I was asking, because we never did it, and I just didn't. Obviously, for me, it wasn't. We knew when it started, but we never delineated when it was over. So that is my question, I guess.
Yeah. So I think what happens in the reality of our lives is that many of us, and I'm speaking really from my lens as a liberal Reform rabbi, we don't hit every single commandment all of the time, right? There are some people who do, and it's beautiful and meaningful. There are a lot of people who light the Shabbat candles every week who might not do Havdalah every week. And maybe it's because that's not a meaningful practice in their lives. Maybe it's because your family, you just didn't know to do it. Maybe it's for a reason that I don't know or can't explain. Maybe it's something you do periodically because you do it when you can, or when you find it to be meaningful, or when you carve out that time. I'm really of the opinion that people should find avenues in Jewish life, whether it's commandments or practices or traditions or values, and they should find those things and do them if they bring meaning and intention and holiness into your lives. And if it does, then make that a routine practice and say yes to more things or try them out. And sometimes it'll be something you do every single week without fail. And sometimes it's maybe not an every single week thing. Maybe it's a monthly thing. Maybe it's for a few weeks in a row, and then you realize 1 week you forgot Havdalah, but then you're going to bring it back. To me, the opportunities are always there. We get to say yes to them. We get to do the things that bring meaning and godliness and community and divinity into our lives. And those are the ways that we make our lives sacred through Judaism. And to me, it's not about a failure to do something, and that's a bad thing. It's more about an opportunity to get to say yes. So I'm going to go ahead and move to bar mitzvah. I'm going to also check my time. Oh, we're okay. Okay. So for bar mitzvah, Pirkei Avot, which is the ethics of our fathers, this comes from the Mishnah, talks about the times in life that you get to do different things. It does, in fact, outline things. Again, we're pretty machmir, we're pretty stringent on detail-oriented stuff. So in Pirkei Avot, chapter 5, it says, you would also say that 5 is the age for the study of Scripture. So at age 5, you get to start studying Torah. Scripture is Torah. 10 for the study of Mishnah. 13 for the obligation to observe the mitzvot. 15 for the study of Talmud, 18 for marriage. Guys, I'm not marrying anybody at 18, I'm just telling you. 20 to pursue a livelihood, 30 for strength, 40 for understanding, 50 for counsel, 60 for sagacity, I think is how you pronounce it. Does anybody want to help? Yep, sagacity, okay. 70 for elderliness, 80 for power, don't be offended, 90 to stoop. 100-year-old is as one who has died and passed away and has been negated from the world. It's kind of harsh. It's kind of harsh. Remember though, friends, the Talmud was written in a time where the life expectancy was vastly different than where we have it now. Remember, we're making adults at age 13, okay? That's the life expectancy here. So what we find here is an outline of what you get to do at different points of your life. So you can start studying Torah at age 5. I'm here to tell you that my son is studying Torah at Friedel's, never been happier. He's 5, I've fulfilled this obligation. Excellent. 10 for the study of Mishnah. So after 5 years, you get to delve into the next layer, which is the Mishnah, which is a commentary on the Torah. We have commentaries upon commentaries, guys. 13, the age to observe the mitzvot. Now, bar mitzvah, son of the mitzvot, right? Child of the mitzvot. At 13, you have what? A bar mitzvah, because that is the age that Pirkei Avot outlines as the time that we are obligated to the mitzvot, right? Before 13, we can try them out. Our parents get to make decisions for us. We're not obligated to do things like keep kosher or to fast or to on Yom Kippur or other fast days. We're not obligated to any of the commandments, time-bound or otherwise. At 13, we become obligated. And what is the mechanism for which we become obligated? We have a ritual, right? It doesn't just magically happen. We have a ritual at 13. Now, what does a bar mitzvah look like? Anybody? What happens at a bar mitzvah, Sherry?
Well, my father explained to me, as the youngest of 9, that he went to shul with his father on a Monday or Thursday morning, read a little Torah, had a little something to eat or drink, and went to school.
Mm-hmm.
And was given a fountain pen.
Was given a fountain pen, important. So Sherry's father, was it? Yeah, father went to shul on a Monday or a Thursday, a traditional Torah reading day, read some Torah, got a fountain pen, and that was his bar mitzvah. Then he went to school. In fact, that is what is required for a bar mitzvah, not the fountain pen, but in general, having an aliyah, right? Not even reading Torah, but having an aliyah, being called up to do the blessing for Torah reading, is what makes one officially bar mitzvah. That is the transformative moment.
My husband grew up at Temple, never had a bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
When Michael was bar mitzvah, our first child, he was called up for an aliyah, and Rabbi Kripke still then? No, they were at Temple. I don't even remember.
I thought it was Rabbi Brooks for Mike.
No, it was for Jim. But anyhow,
Okay.
Jim was told, you are now a bar mitzvah.
Well, at a certain point, yes, you come up and you get an aliyah, you're told you're a bar mitzvah. And there are people who have adult b'nai mitzvah, right, who officially become b'nai mitzvah much later in life. But we at Temple, and I think at a lot of other places, our b'nai mitzvah students do not actually just do an aliyah and call it a day. They have a lot more responsibilities to fulfill. They lead us in prayer, right? So they lead the whole service. They do the prayers and they learn about it. They learn how to read Torah, which means that they're learning the trope associated with Torah so that they can read the cantillation. They do the blessings, of course. They read Haftorah. They study their Torah portion and they give a Devar Torah, which is, some words of Torah. Some of them are more words than others, but, we try for the best. They lead the whole service. That's actually not what it takes in the text to become a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, but we have created ritual and meaning for our lives around it, right? We have crafted, each of our synagogues and our communities craft a service and blessings and opportunities for parents to bless their children, for the community to bless the child, for the clergy to work with these children and create relationships with them. That's all part of B'nai Mitzvah. It stems in the text, though. It comes from here, and we create ritual using all of the tools that we have at our disposal, whether there's their liturgy, we have prayers at our disposal that we can create ritual around. We have ritual items, like inviting them to light candles, like leading us in the Kiddush, like holding the Torah as we pass it down and doing a hakafah. We create ritual through all of the tools that we have in our toolbox. But at the end of the day, it has to come back to this authentic interpretation of our text. Just as a note, though, 18 for marriage, 30 for strength, 40 for understanding. That's why it's traditionally people don't study Kabbalah and the Zohar until they're 40 years old. 50 for counsel. 60, you've reached a level of having sage and good counsel. Mazel tov for all of you have reached 60. So then 70, so in a different text, by the way, 70 is what it means to live a full life. And therefore, at 83, there's a tradition of having a second bar mitzvah. Some people in our community have done that because if you've lived and attained complete wisdom for a complete life by 70, that means you get to start over. And again, at 13 years old, at 83, you get to have a second bar mitzvah. For those of you who saw Miles Reamer did this a few years ago at Temple, it's a really beautiful opportunity. You don't get to have your, children and your grandchildren and other family and friends at your first bar mitzvah. You do it your second. So this is a good opportunity. So I'm going to kind of go through marriage pretty quickly. This prayer, there are blessings. It talks about the Sheva Brachot. So in a wedding, one of our traditions is to sanctify the marriage with 7 blessings. Now, who here knows the moment in a wedding that you're actually considered married? What's the transformative moment?
When they break the glass.
When they break the glass. What else? Huh? When they get a ring. Yes. A lot of people think it's the breaking of the glass. A lot of people think that it might be the 7 blessings because those are pretty well known. The actual moment that you become married to each other is when you exchange the vows and exchange wedding rings. So that's the moment. We craft this entire experience under the chuppah to give ritual, to give sanctity, to bring God and divinity into this moment in our lives, to create that moment of transformation so that when they leave the chuppah, they've received blessings from the community, so that they've given vows to each other. All of this is part of it. But the text, so then the text says, the blessings of the bridegrooms is said in the presence of 10 persons all 7 days. So there's a tradition, we say the Sheva Brachot at the wedding, but there's also a tradition to have gatherings for the 7 days following a wedding. Usually there's a lot of food involved because it would not be a gathering of Jewish people if we didn't have food involved. But usually often it's dinner or after dinner with some dessert, and people recite the 7 blessings again for the couple for 7 days following a wedding.
I remember when my kids were younger here at the J, there was a marriage ceremony for kids, and the cantor at that time said, I can't say these words because that would actually make you married.
True. Yes, you have to be careful. We don't want to accidentally marry people. It's not a good look for us. Yes, when we do mock weddings, which we sometimes do, we married some stuffies at Temple last year to each other. We do it with stuffies instead of people because we don't want to accidentally marry people. But we did marry 2 nice teddy bears to each other. Yes. Okay. So we have, the words there after this are some of the words that we find in the Sheva Brachot. That's where they come from. It comes from Talmud and Ketubot. We're taking our holy texts, our sacred scriptures, and we're bringing them to life in ways that create ritual moments. These are the words that are sung at weddings under the chuppah. We take them from Talmud, we put music and language to them and ritual around them, and they become the way that we bless a couple for marriage. So then one of the last life cycle events is death and mourning. And that is one of the things that we have a tremendous amount of ritual around, because it is one of the hardest things that we encounter in our lives. I'm going to do it in 7 minutes, guys. I promise. I won't keep you. So we have lots of different things and traditions around death and mourning. Unfortunately, we all have or will experience the loss of people we love in our lives. And I know that however we experience loss and grief, that doesn't change. But what can help are rituals and ways of doing things that help mark that loss and transform it and require us to be around people and to separate and give ourselves sacred time and space to mourn and grieve. I think, and this is my personal bias as somebody who studied grief support, the rabbis were tremendously thoughtful and advanced in their understanding of how to grieve and what it means to grieve. If you look at modern understandings, whether it's Kubler-Ross or steps versus cycles, all of these things, you can actually align a lot of what the rabbis do to some of these modern ways that people think that we process grief. They were ahead of their times in a lot of ways. So in the Talmud, it says, if one buries his dead 3 days before a festival, the restrictions pertaining to his 7 days of mourning fall away. If he buries his dead 8 days before a festival, the restrictions of the 30 days fall away, because the sages say that the Sabbath enters into count, but does not interrupt, while the festivals interrupt and do not enter into the count. So this is one way of looking, again, where we are very thoughtful and they're very specific about the ways that we grieve. So this is talking about the standard ways that we count after death, right? We have Shiva, the first 7 days after mourning. But Shiva is interrupted when Shabbat falls, because we don't have that level of mourning on Shabbat. We don't sit Shiva on Shabbat. Shabbat overrides that. If we have a festival like Sukkot or Passover, our counting changes because of the festival. We have, and all of this is spelled out within our texts, right? What guides our grief process and the traditions that we have all comes and is spelled out in Talmud, in Mishnah, in our codes. All of these things are here. Then we have all of these different traditions that we have, whether we have the covering of the mirrors, which we see in some of our texts, whether we have the Shiva candles that connects to a verse in Proverbs, which is the soul of man is the lamp of God. We have these connections to all of the things that help make our grief process different. We cover the mirrors so that we're not looking at ourselves and worrying about how we look or our reflection or our outward appearance, because we're actually supposed to be looking inward and not concerned about what the world thinks of us or what we think of our appearance. That doesn't matter in these moments. All of these traditions which guide our lives and help us to bring this level of godliness into the world, they come from our texts, and then we get to create ways of observing, of creating meaning, whether it's the Shabbat candles like we talked about at the beginning, or rituals around B'nai Mitzvah, or weddings, or anything else. We all might do it slightly differently, but it all comes from the same sources. So as we conclude today, are there any lingering questions or thoughts? Yes. I think that it depends on who you ask, which rabbi it would depend on how late you are, what that means, if you've seen them lit other places. There's a lot of factors in there. I would say, because I'm a Reform rabbi, I would say better to light. Mm-hmm. So I thank you all for learning with me today. I appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the Federation and to Naomi for organizing.